Namaste and welcome to another episode of A Questioning Mind. This is a very long two episode, and I'm very glad to welcome today Deepak Srinivasan. Deepak is a friend, and we've co-authored a couple of articles together and are working on a few more. He's extremely knowledgeable about global history. He's a very good scholar of Indian culture as well as global history. So today we discuss the more urgent topic of the Israel-Palestine war and the attacks by Hamas that have unleashed wars by proxy against Israel and with the Palestinian citizens left in the fray. So, on today's episode, we will be diving a little bit into the history of the Palestinian cause, of Israeli expansion, as well as why Arab states which surround Israel and Palestine, which are actually apparently friendly to the Palestinian cause, will not allow Palestinian refugees within their borders. Countries such as Jordan, such as Lebanon, Egypt have completely refused access. Egypt has already got fencing in place against refugees escaping to Egypt as Israel retaliates against Hamas. And the King of Jordan has specified that it is a red line that will be crossed and he will not be taking in any Palestinian refugees. So, Deepak, without further ado, I'd really request you to begin, with the history of Israel and Palestine and then move on to the topics that I mentioned.
Okay, so if you look back at biblical history, Israel was the promised land for the Jews, and they came from Egypt and built a kingdom in Israel. And it was later on conquered by the Babylonians, and i- several centuries later by the Romans. And in 70 AD, the Romans expelled the Jews from Egypt. They renamed the province of Judea as Syria Palestina.
Mm.
Palestine comes from Philistines, the adversaries of the Jews in the Bible. So it was to humiliate the Jews that it was named that way. And since they were expelled at the time, they have not constituted a numerical majority in what is the land of Israel, but they've always maintained a presence there. And for nearly 2,000 years, they promised each other every year that the next year they would meet in Jerusalem. So
So these are the Jews
the
that.
Jews, yes.
Right, yeah.
And in the 19th century, the Zionist movement took off, and a lot of Jews started purchasing property in what is today Israel. At the time, it was under the Ottoman Empire.
Mm.
So they would go there, and in the Ottoman Empire, the Jews would be dhimmis; they would be second-class citizens. They would go there, they would purchase the land, and try to settle there in as large a number as possible. And the Ottomans as well tried to settle other people there so that the Jews would not become a majority there.
Right.
And eventually, when World War One is happening, the British come out with the Balfour Declaration, which is that if they win the war and dismantle the Ottoman Empire, they would establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So in 1922, the League of Nations gave the land to the British as the British mandate for Palestine. And actually, let me show you some maps so that this is more understandable. So in 1922, this was the map. It included what is marked here as Jewish Palestine, as well as what is marked here as Transjordan. All of this combined was the British mandate for Palestine. Within 2 months of that, Transjordan was separated as an Arab state, and the Hashemites were installed as the monarchs there. So Jews were no longer allowed to settle in Transjordan, and instead they were encouraged to settle in Jewish Palestine, or what was going to become Jewish Palestine. Of course, at that time it was the British mandate for
Mm.
Palestine. And the Balfour Declaration called for political rights for the Jews, but only civil and religious rights for the Arabs.
Arabs.
At that point, the Arabs were still the majority in the land of Israel.
Mm.
Now, if you fast forward to 1938, sorry, this is the 1922 plan. So this is in 1937. The Robert Peel Commission, in 1937, a commission was constituted. It was the Peel Commission, and they came out with this plan, which you can see on the screen. It shows the Jewish homeland in blue, what was proposed as Jewish homeland, Jerusalem as an international zone, and the pink area as the Arab homeland. Then fast forward another decade, and you get to 1947. After World War II, the United Nations is formed, and the British mandate for Palestine is passed on to the UN, and they come up with a partition plan. And this was the plan that they gave. Now, in this plan, the green areas are meant to be the the Jewish state, and the yellow areas are meant to be the Arab state. In this, the green areas, had Israel gotten only those, they would have had a bare Jewish majority, but not a lot of territory. And as you can see, it would be very hard to defend territory like this. So the the Jewish people agreed to this plan, but the Arabs did not. And therefore, once Israel was formed and declared, it was invaded by several Arab neighbors. And this is where the genesis of the Palestinian identity really takes root, because the the Arabs have a concept called the Nakba, which they consider a great tragedy. They had to uh, nearly half the Arab population of Israel migrated at that time. There are several theories around why they did it. The Jewish side says that it's because the Arab higher authorities asked them to migrate because they wanted to fight the war and didn't want civilians getting in between, because that would hinder the war efforts. And the Arab side says that they were forcibly expelled from their homes. So this is the bone of contention between the two sides, and this forms the genesis of the Palestinian cause. Because unlike in other places where people have left, the Palestinians consider themselves refugees even generation after generation until now. So there are nearly 5.2 million Palestinian refugees living in other countries, and they want a right to return to those homes. But if they return, then you will not have a Jewish majority state. So
Right.
that is kind of the bone of contention between the two of them. So once these countries invade, what follows next is that Israel wins that war. And when the armistice agreement is signed in 1949, the Jews have gotten all of this territory. So only the green area and the blue area is conquered by Jordan and Egypt, respectively. So this is the West Bank, and the blue area is Gaza. The rest become the country of Israel. By this point, Israel has not only a larger Jewish majority than it expected in 1947, but also a larger land area. So it becomes more defensible as well as has a larger majority. Now, 20 years, 18 years after this, there's another war in 1967, the Six Day War, where several Arab countries again invade Israel. And in a defensive war, Israel conquers even more territory and ends up with something like this. So the Golan Heights are taken. This was originally part of mandatory Palestine, but later on ceded to French Syria at that time. So that is taken so that it gives them the heights that they can defend from. And they take the West Bank from Jordan, and they take Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, all the way up to the Suez Canal here.
We've had the 1922 declaration by the
League of
the League
Nations.
of Nations, and which is the precursor to the United Nations for any audiences that aren't familiar with it. So once that was done, then Israel did agree to those terms, but the Arab nations did not. So as soon as the Jewish homeland was formed, it was attacked by Arab nations surrounding it. But then Israel won that war and was able to capture even more territory than it had agreed to. It had expected those attacks because they were surrounded by hostile neighbors. It was well known that the Jews were religiously hated. So after that, in 1947, there was a war where Israel conquered more territory. And
67, yeah.
yes, that was the Six-Day War, where Israel then conquered territory from Jordan and Egypt, as well as from Syria, to make the current state of Israel and most of the present borders. So after that, the Palestinians had to, they did establish a Jewish majority state for the most part.
Right. So it was a Jewish majority state from
47.
1949, right? So 47. So once the war ended, it was a larger Jewish majority.
Right.
But after the Six-Day War, when Israel occupied the West Bank, the Palestinian Fedayeen had to relocate to Jordan.
Mm,
And from there, with Jordan as a home base, they started launching large scale attacks on Israel. Now, the thing about Jordan is, besides a few Bedouin tribes and, of course, the Hashemite monarchy there, most of the people of Jordan are also of Palestinian origin.
mm,
Nearly 70% of the population there is Palestinian. And originally, when the Balfour Declaration was made, the idea was that everything to the west of the Jordan River would be the Jewish homeland, and everything to the east of the Jordan River would be the Arab homeland.
mm,
But that was not going to be practical given how many Arabs lived there and the number of Jews was just not that high.
mm.
So that is why they came up with the 1922 plan. Anyway, so once they went to Jordan, the Palestinian Fedayeen then launched the Battle of Karameh in 1968. Israel retaliated to the Palestinian Fedayeen's attacks, and that led to the Battle of Karameh in 1968 against the PLO as well as the Jordanian armed forces.
Sorry,
So
you introduced the PLO.
yeah, so the PLO is the Palestine Liberation Organization led by Yasser Arafat, which later was led by Mahmoud Abbas, who is even now the president of the Palestinian Authority. At that time, they were an insurgent group. So they allied with the Jordanian armed forces and attacked Israel, but the Karameh camp was destroyed by Israel. And they ultimately, the Israelites had to retreat. So both sides kind of claimed victory there. But the PLO got a lot of arms and aid from other Arab countries as well. And they were growing pretty rapidly, such that by 1970 they even wanted to overthrow the Hashemite monarchy in Jordan. They tried to do a couple of assassination attempts um upon the king, and those failed.
Just
And
for the audience, I'm just gonna pause here just to remind you who these people were. These were Palestinians who were given refuge by Jordan, you know, same people, Arabs, against an Israeli Jewish state. These Palestinians then formed the PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, who actually, Yasser Arafat is a very commonly known name, well-known name for those who aren't absolutely very young, born in perhaps post 2000s. But I guess we do have a lot of younger audiences as well. But Yasser Arafat was extremely well known, and you know, he led the PLO for the longest time and got a lot of aids and ammunition to lead attacks. That's his attacks against Israel and the Jewish populations were what pushed PLO to fame. And then they turned against their own host, who was the King of Jordan.
right, the Palestinians were running essentially a parallel state there.
Right.
And at some point, King Hussein of Jordan, he had enough of it and he just wanted to expel the PLO from there. But Syria intervened as well. And at one point in September 1970, the Palestinians hijacked three civilian airliners. They evacuated the passengers and then blew up the planes. And this was called the Dawson's Field hijackings. And this was the last straw. It was known. It remains known as the Black September. And so when this happened, the Jordanian army just surrounded the cities that had significant PLO presence and started shelling the camps there.
mm,
And they were just thoroughly routed by the Jordanian forces. And by 1971, the PLO had been expelled from Jordan through Syria to Lebanon,
mm,
where 4 years later, the PLO started, well, I guess, joined the Lebanese civil war.
mm,
And this influx of Palestinians tilted the demographics in Lebanon. And they had a 15-year civil war there where hundreds of thousands of people died. Then in 1991, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, Yasser Arafat supported that as well.
mm, mm,
So it's been a rough history between the neighboring Arab countries and the PLO for decades.
mm.
And it's because of this history that they are wary of taking in more Palestinian refugees now. Another reason, of course, is that the Palestinians have stayed refugees generation after generation. They don't get equal rights in Lebanon or in Jordan or in any of the neighboring countries. They are still treated as refugees. They don't have citizenship rights. They don't have employment rights. And as such, the Palestinians have been demanding a right to return to their homes where they've been expelled from in 1948 or at some other stage. But Israel refuses to give them that, because if 5.2 million Palestinians are allowed back inside, then they will become a significant majority in Israel. And Israel as a Jewish state would cease to exist. So,
Um, that's something that I also kind of want to point out, that the people of Palestine did officially elect Hamas, whose declared goal is the destruction of the state of Israel and the wiping out of all Jews from that land. So
right.
since
That was just the people of Gaza, though.
right, but
Yeah,
that's a significant population as well.
right.
Uh,
It is.
and so everybody returning there poses an actual threat to the state of Israel, which it declares it has a right to defend against. Um, so that's how it is. So it's like saying that all of the Muslim population of Kashmir has to be returned to Pakistan, and all of the Hindus who have been expelled, all of their descendants get their own homes in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Uh,
Right. That would be a good equivalent. Yes. So too, Arafat signed the Oslo Accords with Bill Clinton and Israel. Um, so that was supposed to lead to a two-state solution, which would involve one state in the West Bank and Gaza, which are non-contiguous, and have its capital in East Jerusalem, and the rest would be Israel.
mm,
So that was something that um, the negotiations went on for a while, and Israel made several offers, which were rejected by the Palestinian Authority. So that was, I think, the last attempt at building a Palestinian state. There were multiple intifadas, which did not really succeed in establishing a Palestinian state either. Uh, Even Benjamin Netanyahu later on tried to negotiate with the Palestinians when Obama was the US president. But all of Washington's efforts in the past 3 decades have not really gotten anywhere close to resolving the conflict. And so, under the Trump administration, a different approach was taken, which was that they would try to normalize with other Arab states first, and then eventually finish by making peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
mm.
They attempted that, and that's what led to the Abraham Accords. And under the Biden administration, they've tried to continue that by trying to normalize between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the largest Gulf Arab state. Um, while that was being negotiated, this horrific Hamas attack happened, and now it remains to be seen what comes next.
So that I think is very pertinent. That we've seen actually Hamas being condemned by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia just a few hours ago. That is very, very significant if we go back to history. Of course, the United Arab Emirates did also condemn Hamas and the terrorist attacks against Israel pretty much within a couple of days of the attacks. But with Saudi Arabia actually stepping in to do that after initial pleas to not pleas after initial condemnation of Israel. That's very significant because, as we discussed, the history of the Arab states against Israel have, it's very hostile. So it's the first time that we have seen that the normalization may continue. For those trying to analyze this, it's extremely volatile, but there are attempts to help it along from both parties. So and just to kind of um, end up with Israel and Egypt, Israel and Jordan, the relations between them right now.
Right. So Egypt made peace with Israel in 1979. So the Sinai Peninsula was returned to them, and the leader who made peace, Anwar Sadat, within 2 years he was assassinated precisely because he had made peace with Israel. And in 1994, the Jordanians also made peace with Israel. So those were the only two Arab countries that recognized Israel until 2020 when the Abraham Accords happened. Another bit of interesting context I wanted to point out is if you look at Hamas's charter, Article 6 directly quotes Muhammad Iqbal, who wrote Sare Jaan Se Acha, the
Yes.
ideologue of Pakistan. He is quoted in the Hamas charter. So there is a lot of ideological similarity between the Pakistan movement and the Muslim League that led that movement and the Hamas movement in Gaza.
Right. We do see support even today from the same parties that support either of these organizations. They support the other. So
Right.
there is that, separated by many thousands of kilometers, there is that ideological familiarity in both causes. And we do see that being reflected in the rallies that are ongoing mostly across the Western world, interestingly. So, yes, because I mean, of course, the state of Pakistan is in no state to actually host a lot of rallies at this time, except there were these weird images of somebody eating an Israeli flag. But the protests were actually shut down by Pakistani authorities, unlike the protests in Western nations, which are allowed to go on. And the Palestinians themselves are unable to protest at this time because they are escaping. But it remains of interest that Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon refuse to take in any Palestinian refugees. Refugees who are already in these countries are not given citizenship; they remain refugees, and it only strengthens the cause of Palestine, of the Palestinian homeland, which continues to pose a threat in turn to the existence of Israel itself. So it's a little bit complex, and we are yet
Right.
to
The
see.
distinction we need to make here,
Sorry, yeah.
sorry to interrupt, the distinction we need to make here is that there's the Palestinian cause and people who care about the Palestinian people and what happens with their lives. Because in any other refugee situation, imagine when Ukraine was invaded last year, right? Plenty of European countries took millions of Ukrainian refugees. They were not saying, oh, but if we took them, it would then be ethnic cleansing of Ukraine. But that logic is only applied when it comes to Palestine. The neighbors will say that if they are allowed, if the refugees are allowed to come in, and these are many of them are of course children and women, elderly, non-combatants, right?
Mm.
When Gaza is being shelled, if you were running a neighboring country, what is stopping you from taking in the civilians at least temporarily as refugees until
So
there is a skirmish going on?
right. And this just ties back to the history that we've discussed, because the leaders of these nations have very clearly stated that we cannot afford another attack against Israel from our soil, because that allows Israel the right to retaliate against these nations, and they are the ones that want to maintain peace in the region. So Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon have clearly stated that they have a history. Palestinian refugees coming in have a history of attacking Israel, of fomenting attacks against Israel on the host soil, and they cannot afford that again, because they will be drawn into more wars against Israel, which they do not want to get into. They want the best for their own citizens at this point. So the Palestinian cause, like you said, is extremely different from the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian people are the most major losers to in these wars, because Israel does have a right to defend itself against Hamas. That's being that's accepted internationally,
Right.
and even in the retaliation, they have stated their objectives of attacking militant bases and not civilian. Unlike Hamas, which attacked non-combatants and civilians,
Right.
Israel, the IDF, is attacking the Hamas in particular and taking out its leadership. They haven't even launched a full-scale war. It looks difficult at this time, but it is continuing, and it's not really contained as
Right.
we had hoped. So all of that, and Palestinians have nowhere to go. Of
Right. You can't help but feel sorry for a lot of these people who,
course,
they might be genuinely, you can't help but feel sorry for a lot of these people who
of
might
course.
be genuinely innocent and unable to escape from Hamas's control, and they might have innocent family members dying in
They
shelling.
do.
And
Hamas has a history of using civilians as hostages and human shields. In fact, it is Hamas that blocked the roads after Israel threw down pamphlets and sent emergency alerts saying that these areas would be bombed, and they were advised to leave. They were given a 24-hour deadline to leave. Now, for the record, the 24-hour deadline may seem short. It's not actually short in terms of the distance. It's like 30-minute distance for the people to leave, but the volume makes it very difficult for them to escape.
it's been
Moreover,
many days now,
Hamas,
though, right?
yes, they
Yeah.
haven't really done that. But also, Hamas is creating roadblocks to stop that escape. So they are being used as hostages by terrorist organizations.
Right. And that's a very important point to keep in mind, that the Palestinians are also the victims of Hamas.
Palestinians are I think, the major victims of Hamas,
Right.
and for all of those saying that Israel is cutting off electricity and water, this is a hostile nation, and only 11% of the water is supplied by Israel. Palestine has its own water resources. What Israel did supply was actually converted by Hamas. The pipelines were converted by Hamas to launch rockets. And this is not something that was not supported by the people of Palestine, who were partial to the Hamas cause as well, of wiping out Israel.
Right.
So,
And Israel has started water again to southern Gaza, I think. Only the places that have been asked to evacuate, they are not supplying water now.
right, but it's also very interesting that people that have completely accepted that Israel is a hostile nation that they want to see wiped off the face of the earth without any boundaries at all, are dependent on the same nation for their own survival, which is rather um, interesting.
The morality of warfare has evolved over time, right? 100 years ago, can you imagine something like this happening?
Right now, there's a lot of
But there's an
diplomacy.
asymmetry there.
Right, absolutely.
Israel is acting in a moral manner.
Mm.
Hamas does not. So because
Hamas,
of this asymmetry of morality,
but
sorry?
that Hamas is not supposed to be representative of the Palestine cause, is the argument made here.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, are they legitimate representatives? I think we'll leave that to the Palestinians to decide.
absolutely. You and I are not in a position, because they were elected once, and of course, I've also seen people reiterating the fact that the current population, minority of the current population, was even born at the time when Hamas was elected. I don't agree with that. It's like a significant population was already present in 2006, um, which was when I think Hamas just stopped elections in Palestine. But then no Palestinian actually protested against Hamas.
Right. Well, if they did, I think they'd be killed.
That is true. So yeah. Well, it's a terrible situation all around, and it is the Palestinian citizens that are in the crosshairs of this war, and the Israeli citizens that have been murdered by the Hamas terrorists have completely disappeared from newsprint and present memory, despite the attacks starting only 10 days ago. And I was going through some New York Times articles. Um, there were about three articles, perhaps very neutral, one writing about the Hamas attacks on Israel. Whereas on the hospital bombings, I counted 10 articles. The hospital bombings were proven to be fake. It was all
Right.
of the details of the attacks that even Prime Minister Narendra Modi tweeted about, pledging support to the Palestinian people. That turned out to be fake, but there are 10 articles on a website as reputed as the New York Times, reputed in certain circles as the New York Times. And there really is no mention of the Israeli civilians, the hostages that are still kept in Gaza after going through, you know, horrific trauma. We've seen witnesses recount the gang rapes. We've seen the captured terrorists, the captured Hamas terrorists, confirm that they did rape, they did kill the children, and that was their stated intent when starting the attacks. And these are the hostages and the that remain in Gaza. There is a lot of humanitarian aid that has been promised to Gaza, and passages are being sought by the US as well as other nations, other Western nations that are trying to work with neighboring countries, neighboring Arab nations to allow passage into Palestine to offer humanitarian aid. We have seen all of this humanitarian aid. Now, there was this image of I don't have it on my screen right now, but Japanese consignment that was sent as aid to Palestinian people was being used by Hamas terrorists. And so we don't know, even though there's a lot of promise that this aid will not be used by Palestinian, or will be used by Palestinian citizens and not by Hamas terrorists, there is no guarantee that that will actually happen. So, yeah, there's just a lot of confusion at this time.
Yeah, let's just pray for the best, for the captured hostages to be released, and for Hamas to be degraded, and for civilians on both sides to be safe.
Right. Deepak, thank you so much for joining me today. This was very enlightening, and I'm hoping that the audience has taken a lot from this. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and share. It really makes a difference to the algorithm. It's been a while since we've recorded, but this was a topic too important to miss out on, and I'm so glad again to have had Deepak with me on today's show. Thank you again, Deepak.
Thank you so much for having me on, Sagarika. It was a pleasure to be here with you on your show.
Thank you.